You're listening to All In. This is the podcast dedicated to helping you fulfill the mission of God in your life and around the world. I'm your host, Jeff Wilker. Hey everybody, welcome to today's episode of All In. This week, I'll take you to Amsterdam in the Netherlands with Adam and Sarah Hartel. Adam is a Foursquare missionary, has been serving in Europe for a number of years now, and you're going to get to hear his wonderful story about what God has done, is doing, and will do in the near future in their life. Adam, welcome to today's podcast.
Thank you, Jeff.
It's a joy always to talk with you. Appreciate you and Sarah so much. Hey,
thank you. It's here, yeah.
Tell me, what you guys are doing there in Amsterdam. Give everybody a picture of kind of what has been in your heart and your life over these last few years.
Yeah, well, I'd say, in the last 4.5 years, particularly in Amsterdam, it's been a process of discovery. Mm-hmm. So, the values and vision that we came over here with was essentially to build bridges between the church and their surrounding community. And in particular, to find common interests and common spaces that don't already exist in people's schedules or in society, in which relationship can just be built with the community, value can be added to the community, and doing things in such a way that it really adds value to, sort of the postmodern, post-Christian lifestyle that everybody is leading.
Yeah, this is going to be like one of those movies where they just jump right into the subject. Yeah. Because there's no background or anything. I didn't set this up. I just wanted to plunge right into it.
Sure.
Because there in Amsterdam, it's almost like the iconic city, the principal city around the world of when you think of postmodern, post-Christian, pretty much post everything. It's post-political. It's post pretty much everything that you use to describe Europe. Always mm-hmm. begins with the letter with the word post, but it right. is encapsulated there in Amsterdam. And so when you were talking about things like building bridges, mm-hmm. common interest, the community, those are loaded terms and concepts, especially within right. that postmodern, post-Christian context. Now, build some of the backdrop of that, why those things are important.
Yeah. Well, I'd say, well, let me say this. We came in with those ideas, but not necessarily a solid, tried and true way of implementing those ideas. So that's what the last 4.5 years have been about, just through trial and error, just discovering ways to effectively do that. Now, the backdrop to, sort of Amsterdam being this very post kind of a city today, what attracted me to come here is, Sarah and I, we've always had a great love for building relationship with people that have never had any background in our own spiritual tradition, in the Christian church, in any form or other. And we like the challenges of building those relationships and the discoveries that happen. So when I was learning about Amsterdam, just to make a kind of a long point short, I would say the intriguing thing to me is that Amsterdam has, in a sense, been a very postmodern, ethnically diverse, and post-Christian city for many centuries, and many, many years before, the idea of modernism or postmodernism were even something that we would look at. And the reason for that being is it's been a cultural melting pot for centuries. And so for the city to form, they essentially had to begin to establish values which were, sort of precursors to the postmodern age, which is to say, okay, we're all different, so we're not going to take any one grouping's point and make that sort of the universal truth for else's, mm-hmm. but we're going to find ways to get along, to be asynchronous in the way that we do things, and to respect each other's differences. So that's kind of been in the trenches here for many, many years. So you've got a whole society that's built up around these things, and of course you've got the arts, and you've got many different expressions of spirituality, as well as entrepreneurialism. So that was just some of the things that drew us here.
That's great. Now, remind me the motto that they have there when you're in Amsterdam. I think it's a three-word motto. I'm trying to remember what it is now.
Yeah, well, in Dutch, translated to English, the motto on their city emblem or their coat of arms is, well, originally it was just the three crosses of St. Andrew, which is why when you look at the Amsterdam flag or the city emblem, you just see three X's.
Right.
But that doesn't mean X rated or like triple X, which most people would associate
Yeah, nowadays.
with Amsterdam. Right. It was the three crosses of St. Andrew, and the virtues that they use those three crosses to communicate are courageous, determined, and merciful. And so those are three qualities that are embedded in, I think, a lot of what the people in the city are drawn to, what makes them tick, what's important to them.
That's interesting because it really is true. People have a concept of Amsterdam as the place where you can smoke hash on the streets and where prostitution is rampant. And it's really quite, even though those are elements that are present in that city, they are not the things that define that city.
Precisely. Yeah, I think the biggest disservice that you can do to a city like Amsterdam is to take the things that are happening in Amsterdam and just sort of superimpose them on your city and your context, which would make them seem very socially and culturally deviant. Whereas in Amsterdam, the sale and the use of marijuana, for example, is in a way you could say largely done in moderation because it's regulated.
Right.
Now, I'm not making an argument for or against that, but it actually means that the real intense, sort of people that come through to go on, pot smoking binges, these are tourists.
Right.
And whereas, local Dutch people will frequent the red light district, the red light district gets most of its business from tourists, for people coming in from the outside.
Right.
So, yeah, those are two stigmas that are often misunderstood.
Yeah, and it's sad because it does give a perception of Amsterdam that is very unlike the reality of Amsterdam. It's a tourist perspective.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Yes. And I'd say if you really want to get to the heart of what a city like Amsterdam is about, study a bit of what they called Holland's Golden Age in the 1600s. Mm-hmm. And this was at the height of the trading. And it was Holland's most lucrative time. It was their largest state of empire, if you will. But they did all of it not like how England did it or France or Spain. They did it all through trade.
Right.
Now, granted, there still was some sort of imperialism going on and things being imposed, but we're talking about a highly entrepreneurial culture.
Right.
Their whole thing is, let's start something that doesn't exist before. Let's find a way to work together to add value and to be courageous enough to give it a try.
Now, was this principally through the spice trades?
Yeah, through the spice trades. They had one of the greatest navies, I think their technology and the way that they did ships in those days was definitely at the top. So it was through all of the trading. And because of that trading, you had the Dutch going around the world and, some colonies more so than others. But for instance, in Japan, during an era where all of the foreigners were kicked out, the only people they would allow to come and trade were the Dutch, because they'd get off their ships and say, "We're not Christians, we're Dutchmen." In other words, we're not here to impose, we're not here to change your culture, we just want to trade with you. Certain cultures around the world, like Japan in those days, that were closed off to foreigners, would still allow Dutch traders in, because they weren't there to enforce an empire or enforce a religion. They were there to find a mutually beneficial way of doing trade. And so that brought the Dutch everywhere, and it brought everybody else to Amsterdam.
And you see that is still kind of the Dutch way of they're really amazing at their ability to cross cultural boundaries and influence way beyond the size of their country. It's a tiny little country, but they have tremendous global influence.
Yeah, and I think particularly a city like Amsterdam, there just seems to be a high percentage of entrepreneurs, of startup businesses, and especially within the younger generation in these days.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I've heard I've talked to a lot of different business people especially entrepreneurs. And the thing I hear in common, they all say, what I love about Amsterdam is you can come in with a new wild idea, and there'll be a certain grouping of people that will just say, let's give that a shot. Why not?
Yeah, an amazing thing, and some of that, both of us being Americans, we can recognize that as our own mindset. What a lot of people don't realize is the amount of influence that the Dutch had on the formation of American values.
It's true. Yeah, they essentially invented the stock market as
Yeah,
well.
yeah,
Yeah.
and there was if you've ever read the book called The Island at the Center of the World. It
Hmm.
was it's all about Manhattan, which used to be New Amsterdam, which was,
Yeah.
the whole Dutch, I forget the name of the Dutch trading company that was involved in all of that. But, just a fascinating study on the influence of the Dutch people on New York and
Yeah.
ultimately on the work ethic and mindset even of the American people.
Yes, that's right.
Now, while you're there and you've been doing all of this, tell us about the Blue House and what you guys have been doing there at the Blue House.
Yeah. Well, let's see. I'll try to keep it succinct. Essentially, back in 2009, when my wife and I came on a scouting trip to Amsterdam, because of our friend Pete Brinksma, who is the pastor of the church here, as well as the national leader of Foursquare Holland. When we met together, my wife and I just sort of shared some ideas and some vision that we had about creating a space for people to build relationship that was neither, only the church or 100% not the church, just sort of a new space for people to gather. And in casting that vision, I described even a location with a floor plan, a very particular floor plan, just as a metaphor. And as Pete began to listen to this, he said, wow, that's really specific. And in fact, I've made an appointment for you to go see a place in a newly developed community in Amsterdam that fits your vision perfectly. And there's actually a group of artists living in the building that are using the arts to add value to the community. And that place he was describing to us was the Blue House. And at the time, we saw it, and we were just able to say, yes, this is a good confirmation. We can actually see that something like this would work here. But we didn't, in our wildest dreams, we thought maybe we could use the Blue House, but we weren't positioned to buy a building or anything. So fast forward to 2011, we were here. We were starting initiatives in the community, working together with a small group of local people from Pete's church in the community of Eiberg, where the Blue House is located. And, we've done things ranging from a life group that gathers, a group, like a spiritual support group, who pray for one another, who help each other, that's also very open for new people to join, ranging from that all the way to photo expositions involving people from the community, dance lessons for kids in the community, different kinds of youth events, and monthly dinners for anybody from the community to come and join in. So that's the kind of stuff we've been doing. But I'll finish this part of the story with this. A few years ago, I think about 2.5, 3 years ago, one of the couples that we were partnering with, who already were in the community here, they felt led by God to sell the house that they were living in and buy the Blue House. And this was about a 9-month process of them appealing to do this and being denied. And it was really sort of a David and Goliath kind of situation. But in the end, through incredible and unprecedented favor with the organization that owned the building, they received the building. They're able to sell their house, purchase it, move their family into the second, third, and fourth floors as a home, and secure the ground floor as essentially a neighborhood cafe where we can continue engaging people in the community. So that's the Blue House in a nutshell.
That's amazing. That's amazing. I remember walking around that Blue House with you. It was 3 floors, correct?
Well, actually 4 if you count it by the way that we do in America.
Yeah.
Here we have 0, 1, 2, 3.
Right.
But yeah, essentially 4 floors, including the ground floor.
Yeah, and I remember walking through that building with you and just hearing your heart and your dream for that, and now to see how God has taken that and brought it to this stage of reaching into Eiberg and the things you guys are doing now. How did you get to Amsterdam? What were you doing before that?
Well, before Amsterdam, we were missionaries in Kristiansand, Norway. working with John Henry Nosen, who was the national leader at the time. And we lived there for 8 years and helped to plant a church in that city, as well as in sort of the second half of the time that we were there, really engage the community and the youth of that community.
So you've been a missionary now, what, 12 and a half years?
Yeah, about 12 and a half years, that's right.
Now, how long had you and Sarah been married?
Well, we got married in 2000, and then we were deployed in 2002.
So you were still basically newlyweds, 2 years.
Yes, that's right. And we have 3 children. We have a 10-year-old daughter, an 8-year-old son, and a 5-year-old daughter, and all of them were born in Norway while we were living there.
So the only culture they've ever known is either Norwegian or Dutch culture, basically. That's what they've grown up in.
Yeah, that's right.
Now that's interesting because you've got a major transition coming up in your life.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about that.
Okay. Well, there's a lot to say, but the bottom line is we've been in about a 1.5 year long process of discerning that although we had originally foreseen ourselves living in Europe, in a romantic sense for the rest of our lives, but a bit longer than this, we felt that with the age of our kids and us growing as parents and understanding the needs of our kids, we really felt that it was time to bring them to the States so that they could live closer and in more regular contact with their grandparents and aunts and uncles. So in the beginning of March, we'll be moving our whole family from Amsterdam to Pasadena, California.
Now how are you preparing for this mentally, spiritually, and emotionally, everything? How are you guys preparing for this? This is going to be a huge transition.
It's a really huge transition. I'd say a lot of it was just even the process of discovering how do we prepare for something like this, because this is a very different move than when we went to the mission field.
Mm-hmm.
We're just newlyweds. We didn't have kids, so one of the things that as we've been talking through the process with Pete Brinksma, the national leader here, who is also our pastor here. One of the values we established right at the get-go was, unfortunately, at times American missionaries have a reputation of just sort of being finished and then they're gone.
Mm-hmm.
And the analogy that was used is sort of like they walk to the airport with their back to you, just kind of shouting over their shoulder, "Okay, see you later." Now I can understand why people may do that. I'm not saying that anybody who's done that is wrong or something. But the value that we set for ourselves, one of the ways that we process this is, as we've prepared to go, even in the time frame that we knew and that Pete knew, but others didn't know, we wanted to keep ourselves very engaged relationally right up until the end. So we're kind of seeing ourselves as kind of walking backwards towards the airport, facing the people that we're going away from, continuing to be in relationship, continuing to talk, have them in our home. So that's one thing that's been important. And I would say in doing so, it's very challenging because, we're going through our own grieving process of change and of saying goodbye to a very significant time of our lives and our whole life that has been built up here. But also the people around us are grieving as well. Mm-hmm. Other missionaries I've talked to have done this. They say it's basically the same as grieving a person who has died. The only difference is that person is not gone. They're still in the room and you can talk to them. So we've sought to do that. We feel that that's going well. As far as internal processing as a family, I've had to really partition time out of my work week to say, I need to provide space for me to really pay attention to my kids and their needs, to pay attention to my wife and myself and what we're going through. So we've had some good times of actually using some resources that another missionary family that we know sent over, which helps to start a conversation with your kids about the different emotions you can experience during big transition and grief and loss and those kinds of things. So it's been a lot of time talking, helping our kids to understand that it's okay to feel sad or to feel angry or to feel excited or any of those things. The important thing is, what do we do with our feelings? And so we've been talking through constructive ways of handling that. So I don't feel like we are doing it perfectly or that we somehow know exactly how to do a thing, but we do feel that by allowing the process to be a bit more complicated for ourselves and a bit more challenging, it's giving us opportunity to grow as a family.
Now, it's interesting listening to you talk about the reasonings for making this transition.
Hmm.
Are, normally we give great statements like, well, God's just led us to do this, or God is leading us to do that, and or there was this big opportunity here, and we normally externalize it,
Yeah.
to the point of, because we kind of have this value system that says, well, if you're doing it for the cause, then it's okay to make a transition.
Hmm.
But you're saying you're doing this for an even bigger reason, which is something we always mouth as Christians: family is
Hmm.
important, even though we typically sacrifice family on behalf of ministry. You're saying you are principally and primarily were motivated for this for the sake of your children. Am I hearing that correct?
Yes. Yeah. And it's not, there's no crisis here that we're trying to save our children from. In a sense, it would be easier if it were just sort of, saving ourselves from crisis. Our lives here are great. We love the people we're with here. We've built a great life here. But as Sarah and I have grown in recent years and our kids are getting older, one of the areas that God has really helped us to grow in is to really pay attention to our kids a bit more.
That's
um,
beautiful.
and I mean, that's about as honestly as I can say it. And what we began to notice that we couldn't see as younger parents or with our children being younger was we both come from very close families, and Sarah's family is as close to me as my own natural family, and we do a lot of ministry together. We come out of the same church, and it's a very special relationship that essentially we felt is access to those relationships something that we want to deny our children while they're still growing up. And we decided actually what we really want is to make that available to them, but it did mean sacrificing some of the time that we had intended to spend here, and going through the challenges of making as radical a change as that. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I really commend you for that, for actually living out the value system that we all say that we have, that family is important, kids are important, and that you're doing this with integrity and with honesty. Way to go, man. Kudos to you.
Thank you, Jeff. That's very kind. Thank you.
How are you thinking through this process or preparing your kids for this process? Because they're going to go live in a foreign land. They've never lived in America.
Yeah. Well, we're trying to look at it through the lens of family. So it would be, I think, far more challenging if we were going into a completely new environment in the States, or if we did not have the extremely strong relationship that we have with our sending church in Pasadena. So while the culture and the setting and the ways of doing things will be foreign to our kids, they each of them already have some special friends over there that are waiting for them that we're able to correspond with. They know that they already have a strong relationship with their cousins and with their grandparents. So for them, there's a sense of a grouping of people that's receiving them, and that grouping of people is what will feel like home to them before the culture might feel like home.
Okay.
Yeah, but and we're also just trying to give room that it's going to be hard. Sarah and I, as people who come from the States, we may embrace certain things more quickly. And we need to allow room for our kids to like a thing or to not like a thing, and to be able to talk about it with them.
That's beautiful. That's really good. I admire that a lot about you. There's many
Well,
things I admire about you, and this is one of them. I really do.
well, Jeff, it's easy for me to say it on a podcast, but it's a lot harder to live it out.
Yeah, but even being able to articulate it the way that you have means that you've wrestled through it. And
Yeah.
I know you enough. I know you well enough and long enough to know that you're not just going to blow smoke and talk about something you're not at least attempting to apply in your own life.
Thank you.
So I appreciate that a lot. Now, when you get back to the U.S., do you have any sense or plan of what you and Sarah will be doing?
We certainly have a desire to continue doing the same kind of ministry that we've been doing up to this point. So we will continue to pursue, missional ministry in the community with our home base as the Pasadena Foursquare Church, our sending church, in collaboration with them. So we want to continue being vocational ministers in that sense, but it will require a tremendous shift in terms of understanding how we generate support or have an income and those kinds of things. So those are all things that we're really needing to seek clarity on.
Mm-hmm.
And the most concrete plan that we have for us in coming in, because we're really still wanting to be present to the people and the situations here and not, be 100% having our heads in a situation that doesn't even exist yet in the States. So what we've set up for ourselves, per the advice of the pastors of our sending church and some other missionaries we've been talking with, is essentially the first 6 months. We're dividing that into 3 sections. And the first 2 months will be just pure sabbatical. Mm-hmm. So no engagement. We will have a temporary place to live, food on the table, roof over our heads, and a car. So our basic needs will be met. So we'll have 2 months of sabbatical. Then the second 2 months will be a time for light engagement, just to begin to put our hands to the plow, so to speak, and seek clarity from God. And the last 2 months will be a time for a bit more intentional and heavy engagement in what God has given us clarity towards. Yeah. So we're easing into it, but in a very intentional and Spirit-led way. Mm-hmm. And I feel that, after having already participated in a sabbatical and also with the great love and confidence I have in the people that will be around us, that feels like more than just idealism to say, even though it's hard to say specifically concrete things. But I think what I'd finish with that answer with is to say, we still want to do exactly the same kind of stuff we've been doing in Norway, in Amsterdam, which is building bridges with the community, being peacemakers, and finding a way for our church and for churches to add value to their communities in a way that reveals the kingdom of God present there in the community.
Now, let's take all humility and set it aside for a moment, and let me ask you a very bold question.
Sure.
What skills, resources, mindsets have you gathered from your previous 12 years of life here in Europe that you feel like these are going to be tools in my tool chest that I will be able to use in an American, a West Coast, a Southern California context? What do you sense?
Well, that's a big question. That's something that I'm even sifting through right now, Jeff. But I think what I could say right now is, as missionaries, we've had to learn flexibility and not to define our identity through what we do. Mm-hmm. But through being present to our surroundings and seeing what God pulls out of our toolbox to add value to the people around us. So some of those things that I've seen for myself personally is I feel there is a draw for me to be able to help a church and churches as, for lack of a better term, a consultant or an encourager. To help people see the possibilities that they have right around them in their community to engage their community missionally. There's some other skills that I probably may attempt to earn money with at a freelance level, and that involves things ranging from music to graphic design to photography. The other area that's very close to my heart is working with groupings of people that share us common sense of mission and help provide spiritual direction for that group. In other words, not necessarily giving all or the only attention to what a group would do, but to take the people within that grouping and helping them to be the most healthy spiritually, emotionally, as they engage the task to which they feel called. So call it what you will, okay. But helping people to develop healthy ways of living and abiding in Christ that then lead them outward towards the tasks to which they're called,
Great.
as opposed to just doing the task until you have to collapse and then retreating to Christ for encouragement and kind of, recuperating.
Yeah, more of
So,
kind of along the lines of what some of the old fathers used to call the spiritual formation or the spiritual guidance type stuff.
yeah, and I would say, yeah, spiritual formation is a big part of it. There's sort of like three pillars that I'm working with. One is spiritual formation, which is essentially everything we just talked about right now, developing a healthy way of living that starts first with abiding in Christ and then moving outward from there.
Uh-huh.
Then I would say there would be a sense of mission, always a sense of purpose, of engaging your surroundings with the love of Christ as a peacemaker, revealing the kingdom of God. And then the third aspect, simply put, would be leadership development, and that is to helping people move into the God-given influence that they're being given within a community of people. So sort of those three areas are areas that I'm looking at for the future.
Okay.
I think, functioning within our context at our sending church in Pasadena, there's plenty to engage right there, as well as relationships that we have in the States, as well as over here in Europe.
Yeah. Now, how old were you when you came here to Europe?
Let's see, I think I was 25 years old.
Oh, perfect. Because
Yeah.
in every interview, I always ask this question. If we
Mhm.
had a time machine and we were able to go back to talk to your 25-year-old self, what advice would you give yourself?
To get over myself.
Explain that to me.
Sarah and I, we've been really graced with this amazing gift. And that is that while we were very young, there were people in a church community who believed in us enough to send us overseas and for a community to receive us overseas while we were still under construction, as it were. Now, that being said, I feel that we had a lot to offer, but we also had a lot to grow in. So we were able to work with people who were very patient and very caring to help us to be very effective in what we were doing, and yet at the same time aware of where we're needing to grow. So at 25 years old, I was very idealistic. I felt that I knew, well, this is the way that God works, this is the way that I work, and this is the way that people work, so let's just go do it. And 13 years on the mission field has been a deconstruction process of that container that I'd sort of built for myself, if you will. Now, I also believe in the journey and the process. So there would be no way for my 25-year-old self to get over myself without having lived through the past 13 years. But I think I've learned to take myself a little less seriously, to hold fewer ultimatums over myself in terms of receiving the acceptance of people or of God, and trusting the goodness of God and the support systems that God gives me very naturally, and the relationships that I have around me and the environment He puts me in.
Beautiful.
So I don't know if that may be too esoteric, but
No, it's very good.
I would probably just tell my 25-year-old self, "Hey, lighten up, man."
That'd be some good advice. We were all too uptight at that time, weren't we?
Yes.
We had things to do, people to show. Mostly, I think that it's that whole thing of trying to find yourself and prove yourself.
Yeah, which is a necessary part of life.
It is. It is.
But I'm so thankful to have had 13 years as a missionary, and I would be happy with that as a sort of lifetime activity in and of itself. But still, I'm not yet 40 years old, and to be returning back to my country of origin, feeling like I still have a second lifetime ahead of me.
Yeah.
Of engagement and life to live.
This is true, and I pray that as you go back to the United States, that you help not only infuse them with this grace that you've received while here in Europe, and to see lives change there, that you also help ignite a fire in others for global missions and for the pursuit of Christ, that He's worthy in and of Himself. We kind of get this.
Yes.
We get this idea sometimes that. And I heard somebody talking about this the other day, and everything about what this guy was preaching about was, well, God's got stuff for you to do. God's got stuff for you to do. God's got stuff for you to do, which is all true, but it's more than that. We're not just slaves, we're friends with God.
Yes. Well, and just look at the invitation that Jesus is constantly giving his closest followers. It's always invitations of come be with me.
Yeah.
Follow me. It's not we have a task or a job to get done.
Yeah.
But there are tasks to do. I'd say in reflection on some of the earlier questions, because you're talking about where we've come from and where we're going, one way that I could say it succinctly is this. We feel, if we're going to boil down our role in Europe to one of a few things, one of those things would be this. We feel that we've been called to help Western Europeans be missionaries to their own cultures, and to help encourage them and give them courage and equipping and training to do so. Now, in 13 years of doing that, the desire that surprised me within myself is actually an impulse to want to go now do that within my own culture. So helping Europeans be missionaries to Europe, there's now a desire to say, well, I want to be an American who's a missionary to Americans.
Very good. Very good. Well, Adam, thank you for being on the podcast today. If people want to connect with you, what's the best way they can do that?
Now, I'd say just go straight to our website, which is hartel.com. That's HARTEL.com.
Okay.
And that's been our blog over the years. At the moment, with the transition that we're in, there's not a lot of blogging happening. But if you go to the Contact Us section and send an email through the website, that email will reach me personally.
Wonderful. Well, it's been a joy talking with you again, my friend. Always good. Builds my faith and encourages me a lot whenever I talk with you.
Likewise, Jeff. Thank you very much.
Well, we're done now. Thanks for listening. This is Jeff Roper reminding you that the mission of God is too grand for mediocrity or average living. You were created for a purpose, and that purpose is found in the mission of God. It's your life. Now go live it.